Water, endless, empty, sun-bleached water, stretching as far as his eyes can see. Poon Lim clings tightly to the wooden raft as another wave rolls beneath him, sending his stomach lurching. His lips are cracked, his skin reddened and peeling under the sun's relentless assault. A single can of water, now nearly empty, wobbles beside him, and he knows each sip he takes could be his last. The sea wind howls around him, sharp and cold in the night, but unforgivingly hot in the day. Survival isn't guaranteed. Not out here, not when he's alone against the vastness of the ocean. His mind fights off despair, clinging to the hope that land, or maybe even a ship, might appear on the horizon. As another wave splashes across the raft, Lim braces himself, tasting salt on his tongue and bracing for the next battle in his long, unending journey. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Lim, an ordinary second steward from Hainan, was aboard the British merchant ship SS Ben Lomond, with no inkling that his life was about to change forever. Then, a German U-boat torpedoed the ship, sending Lim and his crewmates plunging into the icy Atlantic. Alone, he managed to find a small, makeshift raft amidst the wreckage, barely enough to keep him afloat. Unlike the strong swimmers aboard, Lim couldn't rely on swimming skills. He had only his determination and the sparse supplies packed into the raft's corner. A few biscuits, a tin of water, a handful of sugar cubes, and some basic survival tools. And so, with a haunting realization, he set his gaze out toward the vast, empty ocean. Days blurred into each other as Lim rationed his meager supplies. By day, he fashioned makeshift fishing hooks from nails and springs, while at night he feared drifting into oblivion. When his water ran out, he resorted to desperate measures, even drinking the blood of fish and sharks he caught to keep himself hydrated. His mind, though weighed down by fatigue and hunger, found creative ways to fight for survival. Every single day, inventing new ways to stave off the inevitable. The more days passed, the more alone he felt. Hope began to fade as passing ships ignored him, and he wondered if his struggle would ever end. For Lim, survival meant harnessing every ounce of strength, enduring every heartbreak, and pushing beyond what he thought possible. Every day was a step into the unknown, a test of the human will to survive. And yet, despite everything, he clung on, waiting for the faintest glimpse of salvation in the endless sea. Before Poon Lim's journey of survival began, he was living an ordinary life in extraordinary times. Born in Hainan, China, Lim was drawn to the sea like many of his countrymen, working as a steward for the British Merchant Navy during World War II. In 1942, Lim was aboard the British ship SS Ben Lomond in the Atlantic, sailing from Cape Town to Paramaribo and then on to New York. In the chaos of global conflict, he had become just another sailor doing his part in the world's great war machine. But on November 23, 1942, as Ben Lomond journeyed north off the coast of Brazil, a German U-boat launched a torpedo that would forever change his life. Within minutes, the ship was torn apart, and in the ensuing chaos, Lim found himself alone in the water, clinging to a life raft as his shipmates disappeared beneath the waves. For Poon Lim, this raft, a small and fragile vessel, would become both his sanctuary and prison, a speck on the vast Atlantic. His survival instincts would soon be tested as he stared out over miles of open ocean with no idea if help would ever arrive. Equipped with a few days' worth of basic supplies, a tin of biscuits, some sugar cubes, and a small container of water, he quickly realized the challenges he faced went beyond what any training could have prepared him for. And so began his journey, not only to survive against nature, but to endure the solitude that threatened his mind as much as the hunger and thirst that threatened his body. Surviving the ocean without much equipment is one thing. Surviving it for 133 days is something few can comprehend. Lim's challenge was not simply about finding food or drinking water, but about creating new ways to endure when resources ran out. He faced a series of impossible choices that required innovation and willpower. As the food supply dwindled, Lim crafted a fishing line from wires and bent nails he scavenged from the raft. He used a biscuit tin to fashion a crude knife, allowing him to cut up his rare catches, small fish, and even birds that occasionally landed on his raft. To conserve his precious drinking water, he would sometimes drink the blood of these fish, a desperate measure, but one he understood might keep him alive a little longer. One of the greatest obstacles Lim faced was dehydration. Salt water surrounded him, yet he had almost no fresh water. He ingeniously tried to use pieces of canvas and the condensation from his own breath to create a rudimentary desalination system, collecting the drops of fresh water that formed. But the makeshift solution yielded only drops, forcing him to carefully ration every sip of water. The psychological impact of this isolation was staggering. Passing ships ignored him, enemy vessels did not stop to help, and he had no way of knowing if he would ever be found. Each day became an act of defiance, his determination to live rooted in small victories over hunger and thirst, as well as in his ability to withstand the madness that threatened to consume him in the loneliness of the endless ocean. Lim's journey at sea didn't just push the limits of human endurance, it rewrote them. After 133 days adrift, he was spotted by Brazilian fishermen who could hardly believe the skeletal figure they encountered had survived alone for so long. His ordeal earned him a place in the record books as the person who had survived the longest time adrift at sea on a raft, a feat that has inspired generations. Upon returning to civilization, Lim was celebrated for his fortitude. The British Royal Navy even used his story in survival training, sharing his methods and the clever improvisations he had developed on the open sea. The Chinese government too honored him, acknowledging his extraordinary courage. Yet, for Lim, survival was a lesson in the limits and strength of the human spirit, one that he carried with him for the rest of his life. But if you thought this is the most unbelievable survival story of all time, wait until you hear about Juliane Koepcke. I want you to imagine this. A thunderous roar fills the cabin, and everything starts to shake violently. The plane dips, jolting everyone inside as if they're caught in a brutal storm. You're 17-year-old Juliane Koepcke, clinging to your seat on a commercial flight, soaring high over the Peruvian rainforest. It's Christmas Eve, 1971. And the holiday joy that filled the air moments before has vanished. In seconds, lightning strikes the plane, and an explosion rips through the fuselage. The seats, people, and fragments of the aircraft scatter around you as you're ejected into the open sky, plummeting 10,000 feet toward the dense jungle below. There's no way to know if anyone else survived, or if you even will. Through the roaring wind and the thin, dizzying air, you brace yourself, almost in shock, barely able to process what's happening. Then, everything goes black. When you regain consciousness, you're lying on the jungle floor, alive against all odds, but injured and utterly alone. Your collarbone is broken, one of your eyes is swollen shut, and your arm is covered in wounds. The plane is gone. Your mother is gone, and only silence surrounds you in the thick, humid air. You're not just stranded. You're marooned in one of the most treacherous environments on Earth. Survival is no longer a choice. It's a challenge you didn't ask for, but must face to make it out alive. Imagine coming to your senses in that terrifying, disorienting moment, alone and injured, with nothing but the vast rainforest around you. The question isn't just, will I survive, but how will I even begin? The dense Amazon is an uncharted wilderness, full of lurking dangers, poisonous plants, venomous snakes, deadly insects, and intense heat. Every instinct screams to keep moving, yet every step could mean injury, exhaustion, or worse. For Juliane, the immediate challenge wasn't only finding food and water, but navigating a jungle she knew held its own brutal rules. And then there was the endless question: could anyone even find me here? With only a bit of candy she'd salvaged from the wreckage, Juliane's first challenge was making a choice: stay and hope for rescue, or find a way out on her own. Juliane Koepcke was no stranger to the Amazon. Her parents were both German biologists who had dedicated their lives to studying its ecosystem. Growing up, she spent time at their research station in the heart of the jungle, so while the rainforest held countless dangers, Juliane had a survival advantage few would in such a hostile environment. She knew which plants were poisonous and that following water could lead to potential rescue. Still, nothing could have prepared her for this nightmare. Stranded in the jungle, miles from help, with severe injuries, limited supplies, and only her instincts and memory to guide her. The crash itself was catastrophic. Lansa Flight 508, a commercial flight bound for Pucallpa, Peru, had been caught in a severe thunderstorm. Juliane was thrown into the chaos, still strapped into her seat, surrounded by fragments of the aircraft as she fell from the sky. Miraculously, the dense forest canopy broke her fall, likely saving her life. Yet even with her childhood knowledge of the Amazon, her chances of survival remained slim. The rainforest was vast and unforgiving, and with a broken collarbone, deep gashes, and blurred vision in one eye, she faced overwhelming odds. The mysteries of survival often come down to small, seemingly insignificant decisions. For Juliane, it began with following the sound of flowing water, trusting her instinct to find a stream and then a river, which she knew might lead to civilization. She trudged through the dense jungle, each step filled with danger. Swarms of insects tormented her, biting at her wounds. Tropical rains turned the forest floor into a slippery trap, and without shoes, every step threatened to slice open her feet on sharp rocks or plant thorns. Even the simple act of staying hydrated became a challenge. Without a safe water source, she risked serious illness. As her wounds festered, she feared infection. One particularly deep gash on her arm began to attract maggots, a horrifying sight she could hardly bear to look at. In her weakened state, every passing day became a battle with herself, not just to keep moving, but to resist the urge to give in to despair. She was entirely alone, surrounded by unfamiliar sounds, with no guarantee she'd ever make it out. Yet she pressed forward, driven by her instinct to survive, and the slim hope that following the river might lead her to help. On the 10th day, that hope paid off. Juliane stumbled upon a boat moored along the riverbank, with a small path leading from it. She waited by the boat, desperate yet cautious, and soon enough, local loggers arrived and took her to safety. Her survival became an inspiration to millions, a reminder of the strength the human spirit can summon in the face of impossible odds. Juliane went on to become a biologist like her parents, dedicating herself to environmental work and the preservation of the same rainforest that had once almost claimed her life. Her experience remains one of the most remarkable tales of survival, a story that shows how instinct, knowledge, and resilience can guide a person through the darkest of circumstances. Juliane's journey through the jungle is a story that echoes through history, much like the tale of Ernest Shackleton's legendary Antarctic expedition. A story not only of survival, but of unwavering courage, even in the most desolate, freezing corners of the world. Sea. A relentless freezing wind whipped across the ice as Ernest Shackleton and his crew struggled to keep their last camp together. Huddled against the biting cold, the men were bruised, exhausted, and mentally shattered. They had been stranded for months on an endless expanse of shifting ice, watching as their beloved ship, the Endurance, groaned and buckled before finally disappearing beneath the Antarctic Sea. Survival had become a daily gamble, a brutal test of endurance and unity in one of the harshest climates known to man. Shackleton, determined and ever watchful, scanned the white horizon, knowing their only hope lay in an 800-mile journey across treacherous icy waters in a lifeboat. But the journey ahead was a monumental risk, one few would dare to imagine, let alone attempt. Shackleton's ambitious 1914 expedition to cross Antarctica was supposed to be groundbreaking, a testament to human exploration and resilience. His goal was to lead the first crew across the frozen continent, traversing from one end to the other, a feat never before attempted. But fate had other plans. Just as they neared the shore, the Endurance became trapped in dense pack ice. Shackleton and his crew of 27 were forced to wait, hoping the ice would break and allow them passage. Instead, as the weeks turned to months, the Endurance was crushed and lost to the frigid depths. With their ship gone and no sign of rescue, they were left utterly alone. Survival was now their only mission. Shackleton was faced with the daunting task of keeping his men alive, despite freezing temperatures, scarce food supplies, and the psychological toll of isolation. The journey across the ice had already been brutal, but their new objective was even more unthinkable: to reach the closest inhabited land, the whaling station on South Georgia Island, more than 800 miles away across open, storm-ravaged seas. The only way there was on a lifeboat, modified with makeshift sails, navigation tools, and enough supplies to last the journey. But that was no guarantee. The Shackleton expedition was no ordinary mission. It was a gamble with life on the edge of human endurance. In 1914, Ernest Shackleton set out with the Endurance and a crew of 27 men on a daring voyage to cross the entire continent of Antarctica. They knew the risks, yet were drawn by the allure of making history. Shackleton, already known for his previous polar explorations, was a hero in Britain, and his journey was backed with high hopes and national pride. But despite their careful planning and experience, no one could fully anticipate the deadly challenges of the Antarctic ice. From the very beginning, nature resisted them. Months before they even reached land, their ship became encased in an impenetrable block of ice. For weeks, they were forced to camp on shifting ice floes as the Endurance groaned under pressure. When it finally succumbed, the men were stranded with only the supplies they could salvage, with the nearest human settlement a daunting 800 miles away across the stormy Southern Ocean. Shackleton and his crew were facing a true test of survival, pitting their wits and resilience against the fiercest elements on Earth. What's fascinating is how Shackleton, in a situation where despair could easily have taken over, managed to keep his men's spirits intact. Surviving such harsh conditions required more than skill. It demanded an unyielding willpower and an almost surreal level of mental and physical endurance. Shackleton's solution, a seemingly impossible journey in a small lifeboat across the Southern Ocean to seek help, was a challenge beyond anything any of the men had trained for. The weather was merciless, with icy winds, towering waves, and constant sleet that drenched their clothes and numbed their bodies to the bone. For nearly 2 weeks, Shackleton and a select crew battled the seas in a boat not meant for such extreme conditions, while the rest of the crew waited, hoping they would survive the journey. As they navigated by stars, lashed by storms that could easily have capsized their small vessel, their survival became not just a matter of skill, but of grit and trust in one another. Shackleton's leadership in those moments created a unity that no storm could break, turning an ordeal of unimaginable hardship into a true test of resilience. After an excruciating journey, Shackleton's small crew finally reached South Georgia Island, bedraggled and barely alive. Yet their struggle wasn't over. They still had to trek across jagged, icy mountains to reach the whaling station on the far side of the island. When Shackleton finally returned with a rescue team, every single crew member was alive, waiting on the ice, just as he had promised. This outcome, unheard of for expeditions of such risk, was a triumph of leadership, unity, and human endurance. Shackleton's story has since become an enduring symbol of survival against all odds, reminding us that sometimes sheer determination can conquer even the harshest environments. So, the next time you find yourself facing a challenge, whether big or small, remember these stories. Remember the will to survive, the drive to push beyond limits, and the courage to believe in the impossible. If these tales inspired you, make sure to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories of human endurance and resilience. Who knows? Maybe your story of perseverance is waiting just around the corner.